Hey, welcome back. Okay, now we're going to move into a category of rock drumming that might surprise you a little bit in regards to using shuffles. Now, what we're talking about with shuffles is we're talking about, of course, triplet bass grooves, da 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 da, or dot da dot da dot da, first and last note of a triplet, or eighth notes that are swung. Now, a lot of people might not think about shuffle grooves when you're speaking about modern rock. Uh, you might go directly toward blues or even some sort of form of jazz with a backbeat. However, if you listen to some more contemporary and modern rock music, you are talking about some shuffle based rock grooves. And there are a lot of great drummers and session drummers like Steve Gadd, like Jeff Porcaro, like Jim Keltner, who are great shuffle players and have used them in rock situations, in more of rock tunes, rather than just sort of the generic blues song with a blues progression or a blues feel. So what I'd like to cover in this lesson are some of the grooves that you may experience from some of these great drummers in your own playing. And these grooves often involve quite a bit of independence or technique, and some techniques you haven't been aware of. And we're going to talk about all that to sort of get you caught up. The first groove I'd like to talk about is a ghost noted shuffle. Now, when you play a standard shuffle with a backbeat in general, again, it could be in blues or jazz blues or even rock, you're going to usually play that shuffle without a lot of ghost notes in your snare hand. Now, I covered this quite a bit in my subscription course when I was talking about shuffles, sort of the bare bone shuffle grooves. And I'm going to play that as a review right now. So here's your standard shuffle played without a lot of bells and whistles, with just the backbeat. Here it sounds. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you're playing more in a blues setting, you're probably going to lighten up your playing a little bit. You might change the position of your rim shot. Perhaps your rim shot is further back. It's not really dead center of the drum. Perhaps you're using less molar technique, maybe even a heel down approach if it's a softer type of environment. But again, we are an environment where we're talking about rock and mostly modern rock playing. So we are going to add more of the molar, or those accents. We are going to get the stick in the center of the head for the rim shot and use a big, full, open heel up technique in the bass drum. But we're also going to talk about the use of ghost notes. So this first groove I want to talk about is the ghost noted shuffle. And again, you find it in players like Jeff Porcaro, and a song that I think of the most is the Lido Shuffle by Boss Skaggs, and Jeff is playing drums, and it's the perfect example of this groove. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the transcription and then the example of this groove and how it goes. Okay, so what you're seeing in the transcription now is what we refer to as the ghost noted shuffle. It's similar to what I played before in that it's based on a triplet rate, but it's got a lot of different elements to this groove. There are very specific ghost notes in the left hand, and the bass drum is more active. In the right hand, you're still playing the basic shuffle groove or shuffle beat, which is beats one and the and of one, or the last note of triplet of each beat. But then you have the insertion of the ghost notes in the left hand. In the middle of beats 1 and 3, in the middle triplet, that's where your ghost note falls. On beats 2 and 4, notice that you have a backbeat followed by another ghost note, and that's something we call a secondary backbeat, where you strike the backbeat with your molar technique or a rim shot, and you're pulling up on a ghost note to get that secondary note in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this groove very slow for you, and I'll speed it up each time so you can hear it at tempo. Here's how it sounds at a slower tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, the key is to really whip that molar stroke or that accent on the backbeat of 2 and 4. So as you're picking up or getting prepared for the next whip stroke, you're tapping on the way up. And that gives you that secondary backbeat. Here it is a little faster. 1, 2, 3, 4. And up to tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4. So make sure you're really thinking about the feel and the pocket and the groove and all the things that make that come to life. And again, as a listening example, listen to that song Lido Shuffle by Boss Skaggs, and you'll hear that whole groove in there, and you'll hear the root to how a lot of these songs have developed, going from a basic blues or shuffle pattern into something like a ghost noted pattern, which applies more to the rock style. Now, I'm going to talk about the halftime ghost noted pattern now, and you may have heard of this before. It was covered in the modern drumming course the first time around for the collective. However, it's now going to be referred more to the Purdie Shuffle, and you may have heard the idea of the Purdie Shuffle before. It's very important to know where this comes from and who created it, and as you probably know, it's from the famed drummer Bernard Purdie. Bernard was working in a lot of different type of acts through the years based on vaudeville, everything from vaudeville to funk to early forms of funk and gospel that kind of rolled over from gospel and soul music into jazz and into rock and so on and so forth. And because of all this, he created the idea of this big bassed backbeat and a halftime feel, but with those ghost notes. So I'm going to show you the transcription for the Purdie Shuffle, and then we're going to talk about it in some different tempos. So by now you should see 2 transcriptions here from the iPad. They're both listed under the Purdie Shuffle groove. Now, Purdie has influenced a lot of different drummers to play the version of this halftime shuffle. So there's a variety of bass drum patterns, there's a variety of open hi-hat patterns, and I'll talk through some of those, perhaps play some of those, but for the most part, I would like to cover the bare bones of the groove, the hi-hat, the snare drum ghost notes, and the backbeat mixed with what the bass drum is doing. I'll play them slow, and then I'll speed them up. We're gonna cover letter A first, this first one. And this is kind of I would say the main pattern that you hear Purdie play on a song like Babylon Sisters from Steely Dan or Home at Last by Steely Dan. And this is the basic Purdie Shuffle. Now, the ghost notes in your left hand are virtually the same as the ghost note shuffle that you just saw, but the backbeat now switches to beat 3 instead of 2 and 4. The ghost notes are still found in the middle of the triplets, and on your backbeat of beat 3, you have that double backbeat we spoke about before, which is the same technique, the full stroke down into the rim shot, pulling up on the next stroke to create that second stroke. On this first variation, the bass drum is a little bit more limited than what you're going to find in the second variation. So this first one is on beat 1, the and of 2, or the last note of triplet of beat 2, and the and of 4, or the last note of the triplet of 4. Okay? So let me play that slow to begin, and then we'll speed it up. Here you go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And a little faster, roughly up to tempo. Here you go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. You're going to find that Purdie will often play a quarter note on his hi-hat, usually a heel down, to get that open sound, so that when he plays it, you're getting an open hi-hat note on each end of every triplet when you play that groove. And it'll sound something like this. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So right there is pretty much the predominant Purdie Shuffle that you're going to hear on a lot of these rock records. Now, Bernard influenced countless drummers to play their version of the halftime shuffle. And perhaps one of the most common ones that you'll hear is the song Fool in the Rain by Led Zeppelin. So you're talking about John Bonham and how it influenced John Bonham to approach this. So the second transcription you see there is more the John Bonham version. Now notice, if you know Fool in the Rain, there is no open hi-hat marked into the pattern. On the pattern in the record, there is an open hi-hat. I will play that for you, but just to begin, I'm gonna play the main pattern, slowed down, same hand pattern, but just a different bass drum pattern. We'll slow it down first, and then we'll speed it up. Here's how that sounds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now more up to speed. And finally, John Bonham added an open hi-hat to that pattern, and it happened on the and of 1. He factored it into that whole pattern, and here's how that would sound. 1, 2, 3, 4. And lastly, although it's not written out, these patterns inspired the pattern for Rosanna. The Rosanna Shuffle by Toto, played by Jeff Porcaro, is one of the most famous drum grooves of all time, and a very high level to achieve for a drummer, modern drummer. This was actually covered in the first drumming course that you saw, but you can see how it's sort of worked its way from the Ghost Note Shuffle into the basic Purdie Shuffle, into the Bonham version of the Purdie Shuffle, and then the Rosanna Shuffle. So slowly, the Rosanna Shuffle sounds like this. And up to speed. All right, now what you see on the transcription are the two patterns I just covered, but just the hand patterns for them. And underneath those, you're gonna find the partials like we did before with the rock, with the straight rock, with the 16ths, but now they're the partials of the triplets. So if you're talking about the triplet, you're talking about the downbeat, the middle note, and you're talking about the third note as well. This is a little bit more difficult because you're dealing with a ghost noted pattern that you want to stay consistent while you're moving the bass drum around. I'm going to take pattern number 1, which is the ghost note pattern, the one with the backbeat on 2 and 4, and I'm going to put those 3 partials in there on the bass drum. I'm going to play 4 measures each so you can hear it go from one to the other. Keep in mind, there are more patterns than this. There's the first and second note of a triplet. There's a second and third note of a triplet. But this is a good place to start, especially with these ghost notes and keeping the molar accents going so that you're really working on your independence and making sure that the bass drum notes lay exactly where they belong while the groove stays steady. Okay, so let's take ghost note hand pattern with the 3 partials. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's move on to our Purdie Shuffle hand pattern. Same idea, it's just the hands, and we're taking those 3 partials and we're putting them into the Purdie Shuffle pattern. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'd like to cover one other shuffle that I think is really important in this subgenre of rock of the shuffles, and that is the Texas Shuffle. Now, I covered this a bit in my subscription course, but I want to bring it into this course for 2 reasons. Number 1, it fits perfectly in the Southern rock genre. And number 2, when you do play it in this genre, especially in a rock feel rather than a blues feel, you're really overly swinging the feel to almost make it seem like a dotted 8th note and 16th rather than the first and the last note of a triplet. It really tightens up and spreads out. And I'm going to show you how that works. Now, in this particular groove, you can see the transcription written here. There are some variations of the Texas Shuffle. Sometimes the right hand or the ride hand swings. Sometimes there's a couple of different ghost note versions, but for the most part, this is the idea of what you want to get with the Texas Shuffle. It's a walking 4 on the floor bass drums, nice and strong, 2 and 4 on the hi-hat if you're playing on the ride, and then the ghost notes in the left hand. Now notice that the ghost notes don't go all the way through. It's just on the and of 1 or the last note of triplet of 1 as well as 3, and then both the first and the last note of the triplet of 2 and 4, and the right hand is just keeping a quarter note on the body part of the ride. So I'm going to play it nice and slow for you so you can hear it. Again, we're going for this more dotted 8th and 16th dot, da, 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 da feel rather than dot, da, 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 da triplet feel, as the Southern feel it really comes off that way, especially in like a song like Cold Shot by Stevie Ray Vaughan or a lot of Stevie Ray Vaughan stuff. All right, so check it out. This is the standard Texas Shuffle, a little bit slower. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, now it's not always played much faster, but when we do speed up the tempo to a standard tempo, this is the way it's going to sound. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the idea of that Southern Texas shuffle type feel. You could actually approach any other shuffle that you're doing in that feel. For instance, a two-handed shuffle, something you would hear in, say, like the Chicago style or the jazz style. I'll play that for you right now in a kind of that Texas feel, again, that Southern tight feel, and it would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. A little bit different groove, two hands playing the same thing rather than the Texas pattern that I showed you before, but with that same feel, that really pulled back feel. And it's important to really kind of differentiate how these feels are played. You know, if it's more of a straight ahead rock thing, you're going to keep that triplet pretty consistent. But if it's that Southern kind of laid back Texas feel, you're going to really tighten it up like that. And it's good to maybe make a combination of some of these exercises, going from one to the other, maybe going from a ghost note shuffle to a Purdie Shuffle, maybe stopping for a second and then restarting a Texas Shuffle, and just hearing the differences of all these, okay? So shuffles do become part of the rock genre, especially if you're approaching them the right way, with the strong backbeat, with the molar, with the right ghost notes, and all the things involved to approach a rock song like that. So, as we move forward in the lessons, the next one is going to cover a variety of different rock styles. You're going to find that's not, again, just the straight or the shuffle feel, but some different things. Stay tuned.